All right, so Alex O'Connor, right? Earlier on in my YouTube journey, right, I found this atheist, and he's pretty popular. Like he's probably one of the most popular atheists of today, right? And a lot of people speculate if he's turning around, if he's actually becoming a theist or whatever. I don't really see that. Certain specs of that maybe, but I don't really see that in real light. Like whenever he has conversations like today, what we're going to look at today. And okay, so the thing is he Alex O'Connor interviewed Cliffe and Stuart Knetchle. Knetchle. I think that's their last name. But and they have like this huge discussion, almost 3 hours long, and it's a great discussion, man. It's a great discussion. There's certain parts of it, right, where Alex, obviously, I'm not. This video ain't even about him. It's about Cliffe and Stuart's, like, their responses, right? And so, because again, like, Alex is a atheist, right? I don't expect nothing more than these questions, okay? Because this is his show, and he wants to ask these certain questions. So, we're gonna see how Cliffe and Stuart answers, and we're gonna see if we can actually, if we agree with it or not. Because some of it I don't agree with. Okay, so like, subscribe, do all that great stuff, and let's get right to it.
Do you think that this grace, this omnipotence, this love and charity of the Old Testament God is expressed in the instances where he commands the complete obliteration of entire nations of people, including the women and the children and even the animals, at multiple points throughout the history of the Israelites trying to conquer their holy land, which is promised to them by God, such that if anybody is already living there, they're driven out, and if they refuse to leave, they're chased out and they're killed, and then they come back and they kill the women and the children. Do you think that this is the same graceful, loving God that's issuing these commands?
No. Instead, I think we've got to read very carefully. First point, do I allow God to judge? In my culture, that's unacceptable. And yet the Bible insists God does have the right to judge. Second point.
So that right there, man, I'm all for. I mean, obviously, the culture today don't look at God as, the creator of the universe, right? So, and obviously, I don't know if Alex does or not, but what I can see is he doesn't, because he is an atheist, at the end of the day. But the thing is when it comes down to, how God can judge, right? God can do whatever he wants, right? Romans 9, right? We are the potter. Oh man, how can you argue back with God, right? Doesn't the potter have right over the clay, So he's completely biblically right, okay, obviously, because God has the right to judge. And that's a bold claim. That's a bold statement when it comes to, this is what I love about Cliffe, right? Because he's going to tell you whatever. Like, he's going to tell you. So if God has a right to judge, right, then God has a right to judge, okay? And I love when Cliffe opens up with that, right? Because he's getting to the root of it, right? Because, obviously atheists don't have a moral objectivity, right? It's no objective morality. It's subjective, okay? And they like to say it's objective, but then whenever you really start pushing them on their values and their world view, then obviously you cannot come to that conclusion logically, that in their worldview that atheism comes out on the other side of objective morality. Okay, it's always subjective. So let's continue.
Is exaggeration being used? Is hyperbole being used in a lot of those passages? Yes, it is. Because clearly, obviously, many of those people who were supposedly all wiped out appear in the next book. So you know that they weren't all wiped out. Mm-hmm. Thirdly, you look at the archaeological evidence for...
All right, hang on. We'll go back. So I don't know about that, though. I mean, yeah, that I think that there's a case for that, obviously, because they appear in the next book. But the thing is when I wouldn't put that out there to win an argument when it comes to genocide. I don't see how that's a good argument, and this is where we will probably disagree. Now, of course, it's a valid answer. Now, I believe it's a valid answer. I think you can come to that conclusion, but I don't know, and that's why I think that's a good thing that Cliffe actually doesn't lead with that, right? Like all the way. That's his second point. His first point is that God has a right to judge. But then he kind of, on that, just pulls back a little bit and says, well, actually, it's just hyperbole and, kind of not really literal, right? Which I believe it is literal. I think you can read this in a literal way because it's literally like his story playing out in the Bible, right? And so it's kind of, I don't see hyperbole in this because it's not the type of text, right? It's not like prophecy or anything. It's literally just God telling them, hey, go wipe them all out. So I'm not really good with that answer. I mean, I guess it is an answer, but I'm not really too good with it. Let's see what else he's got.
Yes, because clearly, obviously, many of those people who were supposedly all wiped out appear in the next book. So you know that they weren't all wiped out. Mm-hmm. Thirdly, you look at the archaeological evidence for Jericho and Ai, and you begin to realize those were probably smaller fortresses. Yes, Rahab was in there as a prostitute, but those were not just families and women and children. Those were fortresses that were protecting the families that lived out in the countryside around them. Next point is, I think that there is not the emphasis on individualism in the Old Testament that we have in our culture.
Yep.
And yet, the more we struggle through children of alcoholics and realize that there are real consequences that stretch down through the generations. And I think the Old Testament does present a picture that we are more interconnected than we as American individualists would like to admit. And when God judges a people group, yes, some innocent people are swept along in the judgment. And that bugs me. I don't like that. And yet, that is part of, I think, what the Bible is talking about when it says we're created in the image of God, meaning that we do have free will, which means there are consequences to my decisions that affect my children.
Okay, so I'm good with that answer. I like that answer because, at the end of the day, it's God's choice what he wants to do, okay? At the end of the day, God has the right to do whatever he wants, Romans 9, right? So, and I'm not speaking for Calvinists, obviously, because I don't use that as, I don't believe that's a salvation passage anyway. And just what Cliffe goes on to say is like, he believes that he will see those children again. Like, just because it says they were all wiped out, that does not mean that their eternal whereabouts, I guess, placement is even mentioned. Like, it doesn't say if they're going to go to heaven or hell. So, and I like that answer because, yes, within God's judgment, there is innocent people that will take some of the brunt of it, right? Will take some of God's swing, I guess, which you can say. So, when God judges, people, like a nation, yeah, not every last one of them, including children, are actually, they're not the ones that God's judging ultimately. And so, again, it's just like, yes, God decides to do what he wants to, but it's like, I like this answer a lot better than the hyperbole one because, it kind of gives more of an explanation to it. So I like it.
That affect my grandchildren. Mm-hmm. We're more interconnected than we would like to admit. So no, those children are not being punished for anything they did wrong.
Right.
But yes, they're born into a cursed, messed up world, and there are consequences to that. I mean, I benefited from going to Davidson College, and a lot of people sacrificed to put Davidson together. You benefited from going to Oxford University, and there are a lot of people who have, over many years, given sacrificially to build that. So there are real consequences that stretch down through the generations of our decisions.
Right.
And also, the Bible never says that those children and all those people go to eternity separate from God. I'm convinced that we will see those children in heaven if they were killed before an age of accountability. So the justice of God will ultimately triumph.
Yeah.
But do I have problems with the text? Yes, of course I have problems with the text. I don't understand it exactly. I don't understand what God is doing exactly there, why he says that kind of thing. But I'm also convinced that hyperbole is being used. And
this is the part of the argument right here that I'm not really with Cliff on this, right? Because when it comes down to, yeah, you do know and you do understand what happens. You just don't want to say you're. I'm not saying that Cliff is scared here because I just praised him for not being scared, but right here, I think he's just kind of like, I got to be easy with my answer a little bit here. Now I'm not accusing him of being scared or not willing to tell the truth or anything. Maybe he does actually believe this. But the thing is, when it comes to God's ultimate choice, he's choosing, right, to judge these people, right? And so he's judging these people. And, yes, maybe, right, the kids under the age of accountability is the ones that, are not the ones that's being punished or whatever like that. I'm great with that. But you're like, you kind of like just easing back, right? Like, God chooses whatever he wants to do. He can judge whoever he wants to. He can do whatever he wants to. But I don't really like that. I don't like these passages, and I'm convinced that hyperbole has been used. I just think that's a little easy, right? I think it's just a tad bit easy. So I don't know.
I think that's a very important thing. For instance, when I was in high school, we used to say, we're going to kill the opposing team that we're going to play that weekend. Not meaning we're literally going to kill them. And the whole idea of, in the Hebrew herem, H-E-R-E-M, of clearing out these people from the promised land. The whole idea that God had given them over 400 years to repent, and they had chosen not to, and now God clears them out. I think it's a complex issue, more complex than the person who would allow it to be, who just says, I just can't believe that God would do something like that.
Like, what kind of instruction had these people been given? Like the people of Ai, the people of Jericho, the Canaanites. I mean, did they have Jewish prophets coming to them and saying, you should repent of your ways, or were they just sort of expected to work it out on their own?
Fascinating question. I'm not sure. I do not know. Obviously, they have consciences. We all have consciences.
Yeah.
And when you study ethics from around the world, it's amazing that it seems we're all like reading off the same sheet music.
Yeah.
And there's more and more research coming out too on just how bad these people groups really
Sure,
were.
right.
I'm seeing more of this.
Child sacrifice.
Canaanites, exactly. It just gets worse every year. Like, how bad is it going to get? And so, but the second one, have you wrestled with this being a really culturally conditioned question?
Oh, absolutely.
Issue of yours? The Chinese don't struggle with this one.
Yeah.
When I've talked to people of other cultures, and I brought it up, and they're like, that's totally fine that God judges in that kind of way.
It's so much worse because it's not just like culturally relative. Like I'm a moral anti-realist. I don't believe in the existence of objective moral values, right? And so like, what could I possibly be meaning here?
Okay, so see, there you go. So Alex just said that he's not one to take up for objective, right, morality. So he's not one of those that tries to connect the whole objective morality type thing. So okay, cool.
I don't wrestle with it because my job here isn't to say that this is wrong. My job is to say something like what Lincoln said of slavery. If this isn't wrong, then nothing is wrong. If there is such a thing as objective morality, I find it very. I mean, look, we just condemned the Canaanites in part for they were killing children. Well, that's exactly what God ordered the Israelites to do when they came into their nation. And we say, okay, well, these people were sinful, idolatrous, and they should have repented. Well, the same is true of the Israelites. They were sinful. They were idolatrous. And yet they had the benefit of having the prophet of God come to them with literal stone tablets telling them what to do. And even then it took them a few tries to get right.
Yeah, so that's the thing with that. So when it comes to they were never warned or anything like that, or it was like, oh well, the Canaanites were doing this, but then God just did it, told the Israelites to go and do the same thing with child sacrifice and everything. That's not child sacrifice, right? Doing what they were doing was literally like taking your child and sacrificing it by killing it, right? And supposedly giving it and sacrificing it and offering their child, their dead child, to their so-called God, right? That's not at all what happened with the Israelites, wiping out civilizations. That's not, or nations rather. That's not at all the same thing. So what he's saying is that basically God is taking, God saying, hey, you're doing wrong with child sacrifice, but now I'm going to take that and I'm going to apply it into my own judgment. And now you, my chosen people, go do the same thing. That's not at all the same thing. And so, child sacrificing and going out and wiping out, nations and children alongside of them, that's not the same thing as child sacrifice.
The Canaanites didn't have that. And yet when the Israelites are sinful, they get a prophet who comes and sets them straight. When the Canaanites are sinful, they get obliterated.
That's because they were God's chosen people, right? God says that I did not choose you because of something that you did, but I have chose you. Like, there's nothing that you've done for me to choose you. But I chose you, the nation of Israel, right? I chose you as my chosen people. So, of course, God's going to send prophets to warn them and for them to turn back, which they never really did, right? Like, it was just kind of like an up and down type thing. Like, they kept repenting, they kept going back down. They kept repenting, they kept, falling away. So, it was never really like a one-time deal where it's like, hey, just, a little slap on the hand. Israel, don't do that no more, but go and kill this entire nation. Like, there was some, mass killings when it came to, the judgments on Israel. I mean, what happened in the Second Temple in 70 AD? What happened to that? What happened in Babylon, right? There was a lot of, different things where they took them captive, yes. But they also killed them. That's judgment. So God don't have separate standards for each nation, right? Just because they sent a prophet doesn't mean anything. Just because God sent a prophet to say, hey, change your ways or else, that doesn't matter. That has zero to do with anything. So I don't know. It's just, I don't know. I mean, he just said that he's not objective. He doesn't believe in objective morality, but yet he's saying that all this is wrong. I mean, he said that he's not saying that this is wrong, but he's clearly condemning, these actions. So
get exterminated. They get chased out.
Just the same way the Israelites were at first the hands of the Assyrians and then the Babylonians.
True, but it was wrong for the Assyrians to do that. It was wrong for the Babylonians to do that.
Yeah, but the Old Testament insists that was part of God's judgment on the Israelites for them doing the child sacrifice, temple prostitution, idolatry. God, so it's God. It gets back to, does God have the right to judge? Yes, he judged the Canaanites, but then remember, a few hundred years later, he judged the Jews, first at the hands of the Assyrians and then the Babylonians.
So I wanted to talk about the hyperbole thing, right? Because maybe we're not talking about killing everybody, maybe...
Well, obviously not, because they occur in the next book.
But, okay, so, for example, in the destruction of Ai, 12,000 people fell that day, all the people of Ai. That's what's said in the book of Joshua. Now, maybe all the people of Ai is like an exaggeration, but 12,000 people is pretty specific. It'd be a weird thing to be doing as hyperbole, right? We have a number of people, 12,000 people. We know it's men, we know it's women, we know it's children are slaughtered. We know that that's not hyperbole. We know that thousands of men were killed. We know that I should quote. I don't want to get this wrong. Perhaps we should look at the text. Yeah. So in Joshua chapter 8, when Israel had finished killing all of the men of Ai in the fields and in the wilderness where they had chased them, and when every one of them had been put to the sword, all of the Israelites returned to Ai and killed those who were in it. 12,000 people fell that day. 12,000 men and women fell that day, all the people of Ai. So we know that women are being killed, non-combatants are being killed. We know that there are thousands of them. We also know that there were people who had left. They'd run into the wilderness. They were out of the promised land, but the Israelites chased after them and then killed them in the wilderness. And it says all of them were put to the sword. Maybe that's an exaggeration. Maybe that some of them ran away. Maybe all of the ones that they captured were put to the sword, but some of them managed to actually run away, and those are the people who show up in the next chapter. But it's only because, for want of trying, that they managed to survive. But maybe it is just hyperbole. But we know that 12,000 people were killed. We know that the Israelites then turned around after killing the fleeing combatants, came back into the city and killed who's left. Well, who's left? The women, the children, the disabled. So even if there's some hyperbole being involved here in terms of the complete destruction, maybe it's not a genocide, but it certainly still seems to be the kind of military practice which, if done today, would see condemnation and a lot more from the United Nations.
But see, like, that's the thing. The United Nations is not the ones who we should be taking authority. Like, if God tells us to do something like that in today's society, I'm not saying He would, because we're in a different time, right? It's a different period, but so when like say that if God was to tell us Christians to go and do mass genocide or whatever, then we shouldn't care what the United Nations say. We shouldn't care what society says. That's the whole point of objective morality. It's not up to society to tell us what's right and what's wrong, okay? And that's what he believes is subjective morality, right? But it doesn't matter if it's hyperbole or not. What matters is that God has the authority and the right to judge. That's what it comes down to. And he's like, oh, let's go back to the hyperbole thing. I'm going to show you where it says in the text, actually like 12,000, okay? Well, of course, that cannot be a literal number, right? Because, like, in the book of Revelation 7, the 144,000, is there exactly 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes of Israel that equals up to 144,000? Not a one over that? Like, I just don't know if that's the case. But again, like, it doesn't matter if it's, 12,000 people. It doesn't matter if it's just a few and it's just hyperbole. God chose to do that because here's the thing. He's wiping out sin. He's wiping out evil. Okay? So we're going to be done with this right here, but I just got a little bit more to say on this. When it comes to, when it comes to like the whole genocide thing, okay? This could be, right? And I'm not saying it is, but this could be a little foreshadowing of what Jesus comes to do when he comes, in a form of a man, and he goes out and he starts wiping out and clearing out the demons that are in the world, that are in the land of Israel. Like, he goes and he starts cleaning house, basically, right? Casting out demons left and right. Like, whenever he's, like in the book of Mark, it's like every other passage, right? It talks about him casting out a demon. So, or demons, right? So, that could be the foreshadowing of what Jesus does when he comes in this earthly ministry, to wipe out and to clear out, right, the evil, the sin, the demons, right, to bring forth the new heavens and new earth, right? which is the promised land. In this context, in the Old Testament, this is a literal thing. It's literal history. It literally happened, right? And so when the children of Israel is going in to wipe out all these people, they're wiping out sinful people, okay? To then take over the promised land. You see where I'm getting? They cast people out, and then they kill them, right? To get rid of the sin, which is an answer that they give. Just go watch the whole thing. It's really great. Don't really agree with some of their answers, but they do just fine. But like when it really comes down to is that God has a choice. Okay, He has a judgment, and He's able to judge and do whatever He wants. Okay, and we should not, especially if we don't hold to objective morality as an atheist, we should not come and try to take God's word and push it onto God and say, here, your God is immoral. Right? I don't see how it's just kind of cowardly, honestly. And I'm not calling Alex O'Connor a coward here. I'm not, he said that that's not his job to do, is to, call this out as evil or bad or immoral, but he clearly is. So I don't know where he stands, but look, if you like this video, like, subscribe, do all that great stuff. And if y'all want to see anything else or catch up on any of my good content or whatever like that, just go check this out right here.